Hey, scholars. Okay, another one of my little handy dandy, sort of just help you sort of read what is essentially a lecture notes that I had sort of created. So, I want to talk about Washington first, and then this war, this Revolutionary War, and we finished off talking about Franklin and his son. And let's talk about Washington and this Revolutionary period. Very interesting. But with Franklin and his son and Washington, I think we'll get a good picture of how, especially look at this Articles of Confederation, and then we can move into how we get to the Constitution after this. All right. Now, always remember that it's what people do with wars. What that makes them important, or the wars itself are not very, I think, interesting nor very important in the long run. People die, yes, it's horrible. People are smart and do different things, but that's a sort of sidetrack. It's after the war. What do the diplomats and the people do with the results of the war? That's the key. And so George is sort of key to this. Is he's not really the warrior guy. He's key to holding everything together that happened because of the revolution. All right. First of all, yeah. Here, just get this started here. Here's the big George. 1732. He's old. He's not as old as he's 20 years younger than Benjamin Franklin, but between Franklin and Washington, these are the two great figures that sort of hold everything together. But Jefferson and Madison and Jefferson and Adams especially are going to be, much younger than this. So he's the old man, and the key to him is a lot of experience. I mean, he's got this fascinating childhood. His older brother Lawrence goes, off to England and joins the Navy, and then he comes home to take over the plantation, which he then names Mount Vernon after his Navy commander in England. And so, this is the empire. He's an empire man, a military empire thinker. And he comes home, and so what does he want to do? He wants his little brother, who's just a teenager, man, just a teenager, send him off into Ohio, send him off into the Ohio Valley, Tennessee, Kentucky. The kid is tall, strong, and definitely, he's like amazing. But who would send their like teenage kid, the kid brother over into notice, 20 years before Daniel Boone. Okay, so this is like the real frontier. So I can't just imagine sending this guy over there. But hey, he does a good job. And then Lawrence dies. Okay, he is now 20 years old. Our man Washington. And then at 21 years old, he owns 6,000 acres. And Governor Dinwiddie sends him off into what we talked about, which starts that war, the French and Indian War, where he screws up. He doesn't know, he hasn't been educated. His father sends his older two brothers off to England to be educated, stuff like that. Young George never knows French. He never knows, he always feels unconfident around very highly educated people like Adams and Hamilton and Jefferson. On the other hand, what makes him great is he has a sense of confidence too, a sense of I have something different. And this is the thing about Washington is he has his insecurities, he has his all sorts of parochialisms, and at the same time he has this massively, wildly large vision of a role for himself, even amidst all these other people with all these other talents and skills. He's amazing. So they come back, and we talked about Braddock. So here's, just throw that in for the fun of it. That's in Williamsburg. Now, we go to this one here. This is the war. Washington is sent up to Lexington and Concord. The war starts in the north, so they want a southern general. And Washington is the right guy for the job. Okay, here's Washington's goal is to keep his army dangerous in the north, middle, and the south, which is like impossible. But he's, just dangerous means they're like in the woods. They're out there. Okay, he can't win a real battle. No full-scale open battle, because you get into a full-scale open battle like he did at White Plains in New York, you're going to lose. So just keep the British a little scared of you. Stay in the woods. You lose every city. Boston's already gone when he goes up to Boston, but then, Philadelphia, New York, whatever city the British want to take, they're going to take. Okay. Now, what begins to end the war is that the Cornwallis there invades the South in 1780, and he takes whatever he wants, takes Richmond. This is like Jefferson. Jefferson jumps out the back window. He's governor of Virginia at this time, and he will actually be impeached by his Virginia state legislature because he's such a cowardly governor. He jumps out the back window. Jefferson never really wants to confront any danger or anything in his life. He's got some weird things. But so Jefferson's sort of definitely not the hero of the Revolutionary War. He's actually an embarrassment to everybody. But at the Battle of Yorktown, you're talking about a peninsula here, and the French are able to hold off the ships so that the British can't come in there. Here's the York River. Here's the James River. And stupid Cornwallis gets himself stuck right in there. And this is where Hamilton is going to come in and do his one last big thing. But mainly these guys are trapped. And Cornwallis has to surrender 1781 or 1782. And then the Treaty of Paris will end the war in 1783. Britain can beat the Americans in any open battle, but they just get worn down. They just don't have a will to keep on fighting. The Americans keep fighting behind trees. The crossing of the Delaware and things like this, which are supposed to be sort of Washington's heroic moments, are really sort of backward moments because there's Washington sneaks across the Delaware on Christmas Eve and attacks. That's not nice. It's not gentlemanly. It's not the European way. All right. So Washington wins the war as a type of losing general, but he's able to hold everyone's respect. He's able to hold people together. Several times he has to be willing to resign because Congress has, there's always these infightings, but no one can imagine the war working and holding things together without George at the center of it. So George is the guy who holds this war together, even though the war is not a heroic war of great battles and things like that. Now, there is a very interesting side light to the battles because off in the West, there's sort of this rogue army. Yes, and it's led by George Rogers Clark. George Rogers Clark's the older brother of William Clark of Lewis and Clark fame. And the Clark family's a very interesting family, big plantation family in Virginia. But George Rogers Clark, another younger brother, had headed over to the wilds of Kentucky out there. And out there, he doesn't feel why should I leave Kentucky and Tennessee? And he's got a bunch of other guys with him. Why should we leave Kentucky and Tennessee and go fight a battle for the East Coast? No. If we're going to fight, we want to fight in the West. And so let's take on the British up here. Let's take on the British out there. Let's get out there. So this Western bunch goes slightly rogue. They are a Virginia militia. They are not, I don't think George Washington is giving them any commands or anything like that. Remember, this whole war is These are state militias underneath a commander-in-chief, George Washington. And this, it's a bit like these United Nations actions, where the United Nations will appoint a leader, but every nation is sending their own army. So they're not, it's hard to hold these things together. And George Rogers Clark does an amazing thing. He gets his guys, they go down the Ohio River, they get to Louisville there, and in Louisville they cross over, and then they attack in Vincennes, they attack in Kaskaskia, they come back to Vincennes, and they have captured the Colonel Hamilton and can claim to have captured the army of the British in the West. So when at the end of the war, and this is, as far as I know, it's unclear. I've never seen this clearly laid out. But the thing is that people know that George Rogers Clark's bunch have beaten the British in the West all the way to the Mississippi. So when we signed the Treaty of Paris in 1783, it's a highly favorable treaty to America. It doesn't just give the West or the East to the winners, to America. It gives the whole dang thing out to the Mississippi. Doesn't give Canada, of course. But, this is the work of George Rogers Clark and this sort of rogue Western army. And Clark will have his troubles out here. We'll talk about later when we get around to Lewis and Clark, and whether these Westerners out here are going to feel all that loyal to those Easterners over there, because that's those mountains are big right along in there. So George Rogers Clark, that's keep in my fascinating, wonderful story, and there's good novels and stuff. Ask me and I'll tell you. Now, so we're at the end of the war. I wanted to get back and say that during the war, you have to understand these state militias, and also understand that each state. Remember, we are called the United States of America. Today we go United States. But back then you went United States. So, I mean, states, what we would call later on states' rights, all these things, the states write their own constitutions before the United States creates a constitution. The states have declarations of independence. The states see themselves as really an independent bunch of entities that have created a unified foreign policy, and the unified foreign policy is the war. Okay, and so the government, basically a type of United Nations situation, is that we're going to have a UN, a U.S. government, which is called the Articles of Confederation. And this thing doesn't get fully implemented until 1781, but it accomplishes a lot. It wins the war, appoints George Washington, sends out diplomats. It's a foreign policy organization, and it writes the Northwest Ordinance, which we'll also talk about later. The Articles of Confederation were tremendously successful. And so any argument that the Articles of Confederation wasn't a good enough government just falls apart by looking at the record. Okay, so always remember this. The Articles of Confederation did a good job. I give you here its powers, okay? You have these delegates from the states to the Congress, which is the Articles of Confederation, and they're primary duties are foreign affairs, a sort of postal service, hold this thing together. They can borrow money. That's where John Adams is going to be sent off, and Ben Franklin is sent off, and other people are sent off to Europe to find people that'll loan us money. It can do bills of credit, can determine the value of coin. These, there'll be some troubles with that. I'm not much an expert on what's going on with that sort of stuff. But we do create, this is where George Washington and sort of intercolonial, interstate figures are going to be created. And the Navy's going to be sort of fun. Control of Indian affairs, that's foreign affairs, you see, and that's important. Administer Western lands. That's going to be huge because that's where the Northwest Ordinance is. But then, settle disputes between states. Whoa. Interstate commerce and things like that. That's going to be where Madison and Hamilton see the wedge, is to use this power here to overthrow that. Oh, yeah, this is going to be fun. Okay, so you have essentially three powers: foreign affairs, Indians in the wars, interstate affairs. That's going to be where they were able to use it to overthrow things, and administering Western lands. These two are going to be tremendously successful. This one is going to be its Achilles heel. All right. So we'll talk more about this when we get into the Constitution. But it's a fun story about how a weak bunch of misfits, really, and especially with this wrong idea of some sort of crazy plot theory in their mind, led by what is one of the most amazing figures in all history, George Washington, and then allied to this other just genius, crazy guy, Ben Franklin. And they come out of this thing with a country that is ready to go. George Washington was asked to be, make yourself king. I mean, Alexander Hamilton and society, the Cincinnati, just greatly feared that we're going to lose. We're going to lose this. All going to fall apart unless we have this real strong figure. But George does not grab power. He resigns after the war, and that may be the most important fact of the whole war, is that George resigned after the war. Yeah. This is that quote I give you from Jefferson. Where is it here? It should be in here somewhere here. Yeah, here. The moderation and virtue of a single character probably prevented the revolution from being closed, as most others have been, by subversion of liberty. So the only thing that kept us from falling like France did into the terror and then Napoleon is the moderation and virtue of George Washington. All right, I wish we could sit around and chat about this, but hey, we could have a lot of fun talking. Anytime you want to come talk to me, let me know. All right.